Who exactly is the killer in Memories of Murder? It's a detail that 99 of viewers missed. Director Bong Joon-ho actually provided the answer quite subtly within the film. A seemingly insignificant character was repeatedly given close-ups at pivotal moments. The director also cut 14 minutes of footage in which the killer's identity was almost explicitly revealed. However, it was this brilliant decision to leave the truth unspoken that allowed Memories of Murder to transcend the limits of a typical thriller, using an eternally unresolved mystery to become an unparalleled milestone in Korean cinematic history. Join me as we revisit this immortal masterpiece and re-examine the details we once overlooked. Finally, I will reveal what was hidden in those buried 14 minutes, and the truth the director chose to conceal. The story begins with a forensic doctor carefully retrieving a bizarre object from the body of a young female victim, a second piece then a third, until an entire peach pit is removed. The killer had forced a fist-sized peach into the victim and crushed it inside her. This wasn't just a rape murder. It was an act of extreme cruelty, but she was clearly not the only victim. The killer strikes only on nights of torrential rain, and that washes away every trace of his heinous crimes. His MO carried a morbid sense of ritual, hands bound behind the back, beastly desires vented, foreign objects inserted, and finally, the victim's underwear pulled over her head, like a displayed trophy. It was a blatant provocation, a killer using the most extreme, bloody means to mock the incompetence and chaos of the Korean police. In 1986, Officer Park Do-man received his first report of a murder. A badly decomposed female body was found in a drainage ditch among the rural rice fields. Park leaned down in the ditch, lay a naked body with hands tied behind her back, covered in a thick swarm of crawling maggots. Curious local children crowded around, playing with the victim's discarded clothes. Back at the station, Park used his usual rural detective logic to interrogate local hoodlums. However, after all that effort, every suspect had a solid alibi. Moreover, there were almost no valuable clues left at the scene. Yet before the first case was solved, another occurred. Days later, a second female body was discovered in another wasteland. The modus operandi was identical to the first. This time, the police seemed to have a stroke of luck. A clear footprint was found, and Park immediately circled it for protection, terrified that this sole piece of crucial evidence might be compromised. But just as he was questioning nearby villagers for clues, a tractor rumbled slowly down the narrow field path. No matter how loudly Park screamed, the driver seemed oblivious, and the wheels crushed the precious footprint with agonizing precision. Staring at the mangled mudmark, Park trembled with rage, yet he was utterly helpless. Exhausted, Park Do-man returned home and complained about the baffling case while resting on his wife's lap. Casual remark from his wife reignited his hope. She said she knew the second victim, and that on the night of the crime, the barbecue shop owner's mentally disabled son, Baek Kwang-ho, was seen following her suspiciously. Baek had an intellectual disability and a history of stealing underwear and stalking women. This news instantly reinvigorated Park Do-man. Within his framework of solving crimes by intuition, Baek Kwang-ho undoubtedly became the prime suspect. Park Do-man immediately tracked down Baek Kwang-ho at an arcade and brought him back to the station's dim basement. Facing this intellectually disabled suspect, Park Do-man's interrogation was both leading and oppressive. Under pressure from the chief, he desperately needed a result, specifically a scapegoat. He had his colleague subject Baek Kwang-ho to a violent forced confession.
I'll keep looking at you one by one. What else am I supposed to do? What are you doing? You know me, come out. Sigh. I don't remember. No, I don't. You?
However, despite being beaten black and blue, simple-minded Baek Kwang-ho maintained his innocence. Seeing the interrogation going nowhere and eager to close the case, Park conceived an utterly absurd idea. Early the next morning, he took one of Baek Kwang-ho's shoes, rushed to the crime scene, forged a footprint, and photographed it, intending to use this ironclad evidence to end the case that had him at his wit's end. While Park was immersed in his brilliant detective work, he was unaware that the serial murders had drawn serious attention from higher authorities. Seo Tae-yeon, a seasoned detective from Seoul, was dispatched to assist. Upon arriving, Seo just wanted to ask a passing woman for directions. However, she was terrified, fled, and accidentally fell into a rice paddy. This dramatic scene was witnessed by the passing Park Do-man. Without a word, Park took Seo down with a flying kick, mistaking him for a common thug. It wasn't until Seo Tae-yeon revealed his police badge that this farce of a misunderstanding came to an awkward end. Back at the station, Park Do-man produced the photo of the forged footprint to interrogate Baek Kwang-ho once again. Faced with this evidence, Baek Kwang-ho continued to deny it with a blank stare. Running out of options, Park Do-man resorted to his final trick. He took Baek Kwang-ho to a grove on the outskirts and had his men dig a massive pit, threatening to bury him alive if he didn't confess. Paralyzed by fear, Baek Kwang-ho's mental defenses finally crumbled. He began to describe in broken sentences how he had killed the victim. Overjoyed, Park Do-man immediately pulled out a recorder to capture the confession. But after only a few sentences, Baek Kwang-ho suddenly stopped cooperating. No matter how much they pressured him, he remained silent. Seo Tae-yeon watched everything from the side, having never witnessed such a preposterous method of interrogation. Back at the office, Seo Tae-yeon began a meticulous analysis of the case files and crime scene photos. Soon, he spotted a crucial detail. The knots tied around the victim's wrists were exceptionally complex. Such professional technique was not something an ordinary person could easily replicate. Next day, when he examined Baek Kwang-ho's hands, he found them to be withered and deformed from severe burns. He could barely hold chopsticks. How could he have tied such intricate knots? Seo Tae-yeon reported his findings to Park Do-man and the captain, but in their haste to close the case, they refused to listen to any dissenting opinions. To solidify the charges against Baek Kwang-ho, the police even staged a reenactment with a stand-in, publicly reconstructing the crime at the scene, while allowing the villagers to look on. As the farce reached its climax, Baek Kwang-ho's father burst onto the scene, crying out hoarsely to plead his son's innocence. Agitated, Baek Kwang-ho began to roar frantically, claiming he hadn't killed anyone, and the scene instantly descended into chaos. Reporters caught wind of the story, rushing to report on this forced confession scandal. Under immense public pressure, high authorities intervened, forcing the police to overturn their findings and release Baek Kwang-ho. The investigation was back to square one. After Baek's release, Park Do-man dropped his perfunctory attitude and was forced to cooperate with Seo Tae-yeon to meticulously review the case clues. Through careful analysis, they identified several common patterns. The victims were mostly dressed in red and were all murdered on rainy nights. Killer appeared to have a very specific signature. Just then, Seo Tae-yeon recalled that when it rained a few days ago, the police department had received a report. A woman also dressed in red had gone missing. He deduced that this missing woman was likely the third victim. The police then launched a grid search near the first two crime scenes, and sure enough, they discovered a third body deep within a rice field. The modus operandi was identical, confirming beyond doubt that this was a serial murder case. However, due to the long burial time, the body was severely decomposed, leaving the forensic team with no viable clues. The case hit another dead end. Flush out the killer. Seo Tae-yeon proposed a daring plan. Have a female officer dress in red on the next rainy night and walk alone down a secluded path to act as bait, while other officers lay in ambush. The plan was risky, but it seemed like their only option. Yet on that rainy night, they waited until the early hours of the morning, but the killer never showed. The rain begins to pour even harder. The policewoman and Seo Tae-yeon are forced to duck into a roadside phone booth to escape the rain. Coincidentally, two schoolgirls also run in to escape the downpour. While chatting, they mention a rumor, saying a madman lives in the woods behind the school, and that he might be the serial killer. At the time, Seo Tae-yeon paid it no mind, dismissing it as idle schoolgirl gossip. He little realized that the seemingly trivial information would later become a vital clue in the investigation, just as the police thought the night would yield nothing on the other side of town. A tragedy was unfolding. A woman receives a call from her husband asking her to bring an umbrella to his factory. Before leaving, she thinks of the recent string of murders and deliberately takes off her red jacket, changing into dark-colored clothes instead. However, as she passes by the pitch-black rice fields, a low whistle suddenly echoes from the shadows. Early the next morning, the police receive another report. A fourth body is found in a ditch, the victim killed in the same gruesome manner as before. Aside from some faint footprints washed out by the rain, the scene yields no clues. But this time the victim wasn't wearing red, which once again completely debunks the police's previous theory. Just as the investigation hits another dead end, an observant policewoman comes forward with a brand new lead. By meticulously reviewing the timeline of the recent cases, she discovers that on every night a woman was murdered. The local radio station always played a song titled Sad Letter. More chillingly, the person requesting the song always asked for it to be played on rainy days. This discovery is a major breakthrough. It is highly likely that the killer requested the song as a way of celebrating his horrific achievements. It is a form of pathological psychological taunting. Seo Tae-yeon immediately rushes to the radio station hoping to obtain information about the requester. However, he is once again a step too late. With so many song requests coming in, the station has no practice of keeping archives. The request postcards from the previous day have already been disposed of as trash. Refusing to give up, Seo Tae-yeon even considers searching for a needle in a haystack within the piles of garbage. But it is ultimately in vain. Meanwhile, Park Do-man remains obsessed with his seemingly absurd blue dragon theory. He suspects the killer is hairless, as in cases like this, a murderer would inevitably leave behind some hair at the crime scene. So he stakes out a public bathhouse all day, secretly observing every man's lower body. He ends up with pruny skin from soaking too long, but still comes up empty-handed, with conventional investigative methods hitting a dead end, and at his wife's suggestion, desperate Park Do-man decides to seek help from the supernatural. He seeks out a well-known local shaman, hoping for some supernatural guidance. The shaman gives him a talisman and tells him to collect soil from the crime scene, mix it with ox blood, and pour it onto the paper. Once the blood dries, the killer's face is supposed to be revealed. Park Do-man skeptically follows the instructions as he waits for the talisman to work its magic. A figure suddenly approaches from a distance. Thinking the killer has returned to the scene, Park Do-man quickly hides, but as the person draws closer, it turns out to be Gesho Tae-yoon. Turns out Seo wanted to understand the killer's mindset through an immersive experience. While they are staring at each other, another stranger slowly approaches. The two immediately duck back into the tall grass on high alert. They watch as the man walks to where the body was discovered. After looking around, he unbuckles his belt and pulls out a piece of women's underwear, beginning to engage in unspeakable lewd acts. Park Do-man immediately concluded that this pervert must be the killer. Just as they were about to move in for the arrest, they accidentally snapped a branch. Without a second thought, the man turned and bolted. The two gave chase, eventually trailing him into a brightly lit factory. But the workers inside were all dressed in identical uniforms and masks, making him impossible to identify. Just as the trail was about to go cold, Park Do-man, with his keen eyes, spotted a man hunched over. He noticed a flash of red underwear peeking out from the man's waistband. In the interrogation room, however, the pervert adamantly denied being the killer. He claimed to be just a timid man with an unusual fetish with his wife pregnant with their third child. Their home was too cramped for any privacy, so he frequented the remote crime scene to seek a thrill. Park Do-man wasn't buying it, and after days of interrogation, the man was pushed to the brink of a breakdown and began to ramble. During his rambling, he repeatedly mentioned the toilets on the hill behind the school, information that aligned perfectly with the schoolgirl's earlier gossip. This immediately put Gesho Tae-yoon on high alert, sensing it was no coincidence. He headed straight for the school. He found nothing unusual at the toilets, but a teacher informed him that a mysterious mad woman did indeed live on the hill. The teacher had heard her crying near the toilets at night following the lead. Gesho Tae-yoon found a dilapidated thatched hut on the hill. The woman inside was terrified by the sudden intrusion of a stranger. Left with no choice, Gesho Tae-yoon brought in a policewoman to help communicate. Comforted by a female officer, the woman finally revealed a shocking secret. She was in fact the sole survivor of this serial murder case. That day, while being assaulted by the killer, she played dead the entire time and narrowly escaped with her life. While she couldn't see the killer's face clearly, she remembered one thing vividly. The killer had unusually soft hands, almost like a woman's. This crucial clue immediately made Gesho Tae-yoon think of the pervert currently under interrogation. Rushed back to the station and grabbed the suspect's hands to examine them. They were calloused with thick joints, not at all like the survivor's description. Clearly, they had once again caught the wrong man. Seo demanded his release, but Park Do-man couldn't accept this outcome. He had just used violence to force a confession, and their simmering conflict finally boiled over into a brawl at the station. Just then, over the radio, that familiar song, Sad Letter, began to play once more outside. The rain had started falling again, and everyone knew Death's scythe would strike again tonight. As feared, the fifth victim was found by the river the next morning. This time, the killer's actions were even more depraved. He had forced peach slices into the victim's body. Enraged by this blatant provocation, Park Do-man shredded all his case notes. Just as they were sinking into despair, the radio station called. They had found a postcard from the person who requested the song. Following the address Park and the O track down the requester Park Hyun-ju. Park worked at a factory facing the police. He didn't show a hint of panic. His eerie cold composure perfectly matched the ruthless psychological profile of a killer. In the interrogation room, Gesho Tae-yoon immediately examined Park Hong-ju's hands. They were fair and delicate, with slender fingers matching the survivor's description perfectly. More importantly, the timing of Park Hong-ju's arrival in town coincided almost exactly with the first murder. It seemed that every clue was pointing directly at him. Park Hong-ju admitted to requesting the songs, but adamantly denied the murder charges. Despite him being the prime suspect, the police had no physical evidence. By law, they only had a 48-hour window to detain him. This time, Park Do-man refrained from using violence. Haunted by the previous wrongful arrests, he hesitated. Yet even the usually rational Gesho Tae-yoon began to waver. He even suggested resorting to a forced confession if they hit a wall. In the midst of this deadlock, Gesho Tae-yoon suddenly remembered the simpleton Baek Kwang-ho. Re-listening to the original interrogation tapes, he spotted a massive inconsistency. How could Baek Kwang-ho, an illiterate simpleton, provide such a vivid and precise account of crime scene details that had never even been disclosed to the press? The only explanation was that he had witnessed the murder firsthand. Clutching at this last straw, Park Do-man and Gesho Tae-yoon rushed to the bar barbecue eatery owned by Bae Kwang-ho's family. But the moment Bae Kwang-ho saw the police, he fled in terror. After a grueling chase, they finally cornered him by the railroad tracks. After some patient coaxing, Bae Kwang-ho finally admitted it, that on the night of the crime he was hiding in a nearby rice stack, and saw the killer's face by the flash of lightning. An excited Park Do-man pulled out Park Hyung-ju's photo for identification. However, at this moment, closer to the truth than ever, Bae Kwang-ho suffered another episode and began to babble incoherently. Losing his composure, Seo Tae-yoon slapped him across the face. This scene was witnessed by Bae Kwang-ho's father and the arriving villagers. Believing the police were once again bullying the simpleton, they rushed forward and attacked the two officers. Amidst the chaos, Bae Kwang-ho broke free and ran onto the tracks just as the train was approaching at high speed. Park Do-man desperately gave chase, but he was one step too late. As the train roared past, Bae Kwang-ho's body was instantly crushed. The only eyewitness met a tragic end right before their eyes. Park Hyung-gyu was released due to a lack of evidence. Just when everyone thought the case would fade into oblivion, forensics delivered a breakthrough discovery. They detected traces of the killer's semen on the fifth victim's body. This provided a scientific opening for the investigation. By comparing this sample with Park Hyung-ju's DNA, they could settle the case once and for all. However, in 1980s Korea, DNA testing was not yet available, so samples had to be sent to the US for analysis. The turnaround would take at least a week. To prevent Park Hyung-ju from striking again in the meantime, Seo Tae-yoon took on the task of 24-hour surveillance. A case of intense surveillance left Seo Tae-yoon physically and mentally drained. Unable to stay awake, he drifted off for a nap in the car. When he woke up, he found that Park Hyung-ju had already boarded a bus. As he vanished into the night, Seo Tae-yoon scrambled to start his car and give chase. But the dilapidated patrol car failed him at the most critical moment. It simply wouldn't start, as if an invisible force in the shadows was preventing them from uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, the camera cuts to Park Do-man's wife, who is walking home alone along a dark road. Man's silhouette is following closely behind her. Those were the soft hands the survivor had described. But just then, a schoolgirl walked past Park Do-man's wife. The killer hesitated between the two for a moment, before finally setting his sights on the younger girl. The next day, the girl's body was discovered in the woods. The state of her body was more gruesome than any of the previous victims, with a ballpoint pen and a thorn-covered spoon inserted into her lower body. Seo Tae-yoon rushed to the scene when he saw that the victim was the very girl who had given him a lead. The one he had personally given a band-aid to. His mental defenses completely shattered. Anger and guilt consumed Seo Tae-yoon's rationality. He charged into the factory like a maddened beast, dragging Park Hyung-gyu out. Dragging him to the tracks and beating him mercilessly, he pulled his revolver and pressed it against Park's head, demanding a confession. Just as Seo was about to pull the trigger, Park Do-man came running out of breath, clutching the DNA report that had just arrived from the United States. Seo opened the report with trembling hands, but the result hit him like a sledgehammer, striking deep into his heart. A DNA mismatch. Park Hyung-ju was not the killer. Seo was devastated. He simply could not accept this outcome. Convinced the report was wrong, he snatched the fallen pistol back up and aimed it at Park once more. Park Do-man held him back with all his might, then turned ear to look at Park with a complex, searching gaze. In all his years as a police officer, he had never seen a suspect look so composed, staring back at him with such unwavering eyes. At that moment, Park's conviction faltered. Perhaps he really wasn't the killer. As they stood in a stalemate, a train came roaring out of the tunnel. A deafening roar drowned out everything. Seizing the opportunity, Park Hyung-ju broke free and vanished into the depths of the pitch-black tunnel. In desperation, Seo Tae-yoon raised his gun and fired 3 consecutive shots into the darkness, but every shot missed. He could only watch as the prime suspect, along with the truth of the case, was swallowed by the endless darkness. After that, no similar crimes ever occurred in Waiseong again. The killer seemed to have vanished into thin air, and the cold case was eventually shelved. In the blink of an eye, 17 years had passed. In 2003, Park Do-man, the once high-spirited local detective, had become a middle-aged businessman working hard just to make ends meet. Long retired from the force, he now had a wife and children, living a quiet and stable life. Yet the memories of the murders and the innocent lives lost remained a wound in his heart that would never heal. One day, while on his way to make a delivery to a client, Park Do-man happened to pass through the old town. He asked the driver to stop and walked alone along the familiar path through the fields. Surrounded by golden rice fields, it seemed as if nothing had changed. He walked over to the drainage ditch where the first victim's body was found, and just like 17 years ago, he squatted down and looked inside. Memories came rushing back like a flood, the same feeling of powerlessness and regret as vivid as yesterday. Suddenly, a young girl's voice interrupted his thoughts. A little girl looked at him with curiosity, asking what he was looking for. Park Do Man replied that he was just remembering something from the past. The girl naively told him that not long ago, another man had been squatting there just like him, saying he was reminiscing about something he had done there a long time ago. Park Do-man froze. He slowly raised his head. His eyes are filled with shock, bewilderment, rage, and profound desolation. In the final shot, the camera slowly zooms in on Park Do-man's weathered face. No longer looking at the drain, nor at the little girl, he stares directly into the camera, at every viewer before the screen. It is a gaze that transcends time and space. Some say he is looking at the killer who just left, while many more believe he is looking at the real culprit, who is watching his own masterpiece from within the theater. This remains one of the most haunting endings in cinematic history. In the deleted scenes, there was an alternative ending envisioned by the director. Akluan resins after he leaves El Tayon stares blankly at an empty chair. Suddenly, the lights begin to flicker violently, and a pair of smooth, fair hands are placed upon his shoulders. This person was the killer. The director intended someone who could enter the station at will. The inconspicuous maintenance worker. He appears on screen at several pivotal moments throughout the film. Later after, Park Hyun-ju is interrogated and released. The maintenance worker appears immediately afterward. His attire is strikingly similar to Park's. This is clearly no coincidence. The director's intent was to suggest there was more than one killer. Having suffered through brutal forced confessions at the station and facing constant public scorn after his release, his heart was filled with resentment. Thus, the final case was his copycat killing. Of course, it's not simply that the maintenance man is the killer. He serves as a metaphor for anyone who appears ordinary. Memories of Murder has long transcended the boundaries of a standard crime thriller, becoming a profound dissection of a specific era in South Korea. A masterpiece that captures the social landscape of its time. When the film was released, the real culprit of the Waesong serial murders was still at large. It wasn't until 2019, 16 years after the film's release. With advancements in DNA technology, South Korean police finally identified the killer, Lee Chung-jae. Ironically, he was already serving a life sentence in prison for another rape and murder. Even more infuriating is that, due to the 15-year statute of limitations for murder cases in South Korea at the time, the Waesong serial murders had long since passed the deadline for prosecution. This outcome deepens the tragic weight of the film. One killer, over a dozen lives lost, countless families shattered, and a shadow cast over the memory of an entire generation. Yet all this suffering could never be fully redressed by the law. As director Bong Joon-ho said, memory itself is the beginning of punishment. For the families of the victims, for the wrongly accused suspects, and for those like Park Do-man and Seo Tae-yoon, the detectives haunted by these cases for the rest of their lives. This indelible memory of murder is their longest and most cruel punishment. That concludes our analysis of Memories of Murder. Wishing you all peace and fulfillment until next time.